It started with a blue baseball cap. Not mine. That alone wouldn't sound like a big deal, I know. A cap left on a nightstand? Could have been from anywhere. Maybe something I picked up and forgot. Maybe one of my friends during poker night a few weeks back. Maybe even one of those freebies we got from the community cleanup drive last spring. But that's the thing. I don't wear baseball caps. Never have. Never liked how they looked on me. And Julia knew that. She used to tease me about it when we were dating, saying I had the kind of face that needed to be seen, not hidden under a brim. We joked about it often. And that's why the sight of that blue cap, sitting there like it belonged, right next to her phone charger and the little bottle of lavender sleep mist she sprayed every night before bed, punched me in the gut in a way I didn't understand at first. I stared at it for a long time before touching it. It was damp around the edges, not soaking wet, but definitely sweaty, like it had been worn for a jog or a gym session. There was no logo on it, just plain navy blue, slightly frayed at the corners, the kind of wear that comes from being used often. I turned it over in my hands, hoping, begging, really, to find some sign it was mine. Maybe something I bought and forgot. Maybe something from a random event. But no, nothing. And then I saw the initials, JT, stitched in small white letters inside the band. That's when everything inside me went still. I called out to Julia from the kitchen, keeping my voice light, like I was asking about the weather. Hey babe, you know whose hat this is? I waited, listening. I heard the water shut off upstairs in the bathroom and the soft pad of her feet on the hardwood as she came down the stairs. She walked into the room, drying her hands on a towel, and paused when she saw what I was holding. That pause, that half-second of frozen breath, of her eyes widening just a bit too much, of her smile not quite reaching her face, that was all I needed. But I still waited. I still gave her the chance. Oh, she said too quickly, reaching out for it. That must be Josh's. He came by yesterday to fix the AC, remember? She chuckled, trying to sound casual, but her voice was just slightly off. Must have left it here. Josh the HVAC guy wears monogrammed hats now. I asked, keeping my voice steady. You said he was only here for 15 minutes. She blinked, then forced a laugh that sounded like it came from someone else entirely. You're being ridiculous, she said, turning away. It's just a hat, Eric. But it wasn't just a hat. And she knew it. She busied herself in the kitchen, opening a cabinet she didn't need, checking the fridge for something she wasn't going to eat. I stood there watching her, holding that hat like it was radioactive. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, to explain it away, to tell myself I was being paranoid, but my gut was twisting into knots, and I've learned that your gut doesn't lie, not about things like this. I didn't press her further that night. I let it go, or at least pretended to. We watched a show. She laughed at all the right parts, rested her head on my shoulder like she always did, and kissed me goodnight before heading upstairs early. I stayed on the couch, staring at the paused credits, the soft glow of the TV painting the room in that familiar, lonely blue. I didn't even realize I was still holding the hat until I noticed my knuckles had gone white around the brim. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, the hat sitting on the dresser like a silent witness. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just lay there, thinking, remembering, replaying every moment from the past few weeks, every time she came home late, every time she got defensive over nothing, every excuse about staying after work for physical therapy charts that somehow needed 3 hours and no phone calls. It wasn't the hat that hurt. It was what it meant. And somehow, I already knew. This was just the beginning. The next morning started like most others, at least on the surface. I made coffee, toast, even scrambled a couple of eggs. Not because I was hungry, but because routine felt like a small barrier between me and the unknown. Julia came downstairs wearing her scrubs, acting like everything was perfectly normal, asking if I wanted her to grab milk on the way home since we were low. I nodded and said sure, all while watching her face, every little twitch of muscle, every dart of her eyes. She was good at pretending. I gave her that. But that morning, she didn't kiss me goodbye, and for some reason, that absence landed harder than the lie about the hat. She just waved, mumbled something about being late, and walked out. And I just stood there, holding the empty coffee cup, wondering when she had stopped loving me or if she ever really had in the first place. The hat was still on the dresser in the guest room, and when I picked it up again, it felt heavier. I don't know why. Maybe because now I had to do something about it. I couldn't just let it sit there anymore like it was part of the furniture. I flipped it inside out again and stared at those stitched letters, JT, like they were daring me to ask the question I hadn't wanted to ask. I didn't know a Josh Thompson or a Jack Talbot or a Jason anything. But Julia did. I just hadn't connected it yet. And then I remembered something from a couple months ago, a name she'd mentioned offhandedly while talking about a new hire at the clinic, someone who started around the same time as their new receptionist. She said he was a chiropractor who came in once a week and helped with certain patients. His name was Jordan. Jordan T. That's all I had at the time. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my body was already ahead of me, pulling open drawers, digging through papers in our home office, flipping through appointment cards and notes she'd left around. It felt wrong, but I also felt like I didn't have a choice anymore. If she was lying to me, if something was happening, I needed to know. I wasn't going to let myself rot in silence while she lived a second life. I found an old sticky note near the bottom of her desk drawer. It had a grocery list scribbled on it, but on the back, almost like an afterthought, there was a number and the name Jordan written next to it, along with a time. Thursday, 6 o'clock. I checked the calendar. That was last Thursday. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I drove to her clinic just after lunch. I waited in my car across the street with the windows halfway down, engine off, not really sure what I was doing. I watched people come and go, older patients, a couple of women in workout gear, a guy in a neck brace. Then, just before 2, he showed up. I knew it was him the moment I saw him. Athletic build, confident walk, sunglasses too big for his face, wearing a hoodie despite the heat. He looked like someone who believed in his own charm a little too much. He walked in like he owned the place. I took a photo of him from my seat and watched the entrance like it owed me something. He stayed inside for over an hour. When he came out, he was laughing at something on his phone. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to punch him in the throat. I didn't do either. I sat there and waited for Julia's shift to end. She came out at 5:30, earlier than she'd told me she would. She wasn't alone. They weren't holding hands or touching or anything obvious, but they were walking close. Too close. Talking, laughing, looking at each other in that way people only do when they're comfortable, when they're hiding something. I felt like I'd been dropped from somewhere high. My stomach was tight, my fists clenched, but I didn't move. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a scene. I took another photo and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way home. I got there before she did, sat in the dark, lights off, the TV on mute. When she walked in 20 minutes later, she was surprised to see me. She tried to act normal again, asked me why I was sitting in the dark like some weirdo. I didn't answer. I just watched her. She stood there waiting, confused at first, then annoyed. Finally, I broke the silence. "Who's Jordan?" She froze, blinked, then frowned like she was trying to recall a vague name from high school. "What are you talking about?" she said, too fast, too defensive. "The guy from the clinic," I said, still staring at her. "The one you left with today." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a second, she looked like she was about to say something honest, but that moment passed, and she rolled her eyes instead. "Jesus, Eric, are you following me now? Seriously?" I didn't answer. I just pulled out my phone and slid it across the coffee table toward her. The pictures were open. Her face went blank when she saw them. She didn't move for a long time. Then she sat down across from me, the hat sitting between us now like it was the third person in the room. "So this is what we're doing now?" she asked quietly. "This is what you did," I replied. I didn't plan for it to get loud, but something in me snapped the moment she picked up the phone and deleted the photos. She didn't even look at them again. She just calmly swiped her finger across the screen and said, "I don't know what this is supposed to prove." I stood up so fast the chair scraped backward and hit the wall. Julia didn't flinch. She just kept sitting there, one leg crossed over the other, acting like we were having a petty argument about whose turn it was to take out the trash. I pointed to the now blank screen, still in her hand, and asked why she didn't even try to lie better. I told her it was insulting that she thought I was that stupid, that deleting a couple of pictures was going to erase what I saw with my own eyes. She didn't answer me right away. Instead, she finally set the phone down, leaned back, and exhaled like she'd just finished a long workout. "I don't owe you an explanation for talking to someone," she said, her voice calm and flat, like we were discussing a late bill or a missed appointment. "You've been distant for months. You barely touch me. You sleep in the guest room half the time." I told her I was in the guest room because of the arguments, the tension, the silence she kept feeding like it was some kind of punishment. I told her I tried, but every time I reached out, she pulled away. Every time I asked what was wrong, she said she was just tired or stressed or had a headache. I reminded her that I asked if she was seeing someone 2 weeks ago, and she laughed in my face. She tilted her head and gave me a look like she was trying to decide if she should be offended or amused. "You're making this into something it's not," she said slowly. "Jordan is a friend. We talk. Sometimes we hang out. That's it." I asked her why a grown married woman needed to sneak around to hang out with a male friend, why she needed to lie about working late when she was really leaving early, why she let another man leave his hat in our bedroom. That one hit her. Her eyes dropped for just a second, but it was enough. I saw it. That flicker of guilt, or panic, or both. But then she looked up and smirked like I was being dramatic. "You're insecure," she said, standing up finally. "You want me to admit to some grand affair just to justify your own paranoia. Maybe if you were more present, I wouldn't need to talk to someone else." That's when I lost it. I told her she didn't get to rewrite the rules after breaking them. I told her I wasn't the one lying about my schedule, sneaking around, erasing evidence. I told her if she wanted to be single so badly, she should have just said so instead of humiliating me behind my back. I walked over to the kitchen and grabbed the hat. I shoved it into her hands and told her to call her friend and return it. And while she was at it, maybe she could return whatever promises they made to each other too. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the hat like it was some useless thing she didn't want to be holding anymore. When she finally looked back at me, her face was flushed and her mouth was tight. "I didn't sleep with him," she said, and for a second I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. Not after the lies. Not after the way she looked at him. I told her I didn't care whether she did or didn't, because either way, she crossed a line and there was no going back. She tried to say something, maybe another excuse, maybe a denial. I don't even know because I cut her off. I told her I wanted her to leave the house for the night. She shook her head and said no, she wasn't going anywhere. I laughed at that, a bitter laugh that didn't feel like mine, and told her that if she didn't go willingly, I'd call someone to help her pack. That's when she started yelling. It wasn't about the hat anymore. It wasn't even about Jordan. It was every buried resentment she had ever held, every little grudge she hadn't spoken out loud for years. She yelled about how I work from home but act like I'm too tired to listen, how I used to cook and don't anymore, how I stopped noticing when she changed her hair, how I forgot our anniversary 2 years ago and thought flowers would fix it. She threw all of it at me like it was justification, like it was currency she'd been saving for a moment like this. I didn't yell back. I just stood there and let her talk because I wanted to hear it all. I wanted the full version of the truth, not the edited one she gave when she thought I wasn't ready to walk away. When she was done, we were both breathing hard, standing 10 feet apart in a house that suddenly felt too small for the two of us. I told her to pack a bag and go stay with her sister, and this time, she didn't argue. She went upstairs in silence. I heard drawers opening, the sound of a suitcase being zipped, her footsteps on the stairs. When she came back down, she didn't look at me. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob, and said, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door closed behind her, and the silence she left behind was deafening. The first thing I did was change the locks. I didn't send her a text or a warning or a heads up. I called the locksmith first thing the next morning and had every door rekeyed before lunch. I told him my wife had left and wasn't coming back for a while, and he didn't ask anything else. I wasn't in the mood to explain. I wanted control over something, even if it was just who could open the front door. I took her name off the utilities the same day. Electricity, internet, water, all of it moved under my name alone. She wouldn't notice right away, but she would. Then I went through the drawers in the kitchen, gathered anything that belonged to her. Her favorite coffee mugs, the stupid juicer she insisted we buy and never used, that ugly green dish towel she claimed was lucky, and boxed it all. I taped it shut, wrote her name across the top, and dropped it off on her sister's porch without a word. I left it there like garbage, knocked once, and drove away. For the next few days, I kept things quiet. No messages. No calls. She didn't reach out either, which honestly stung more than I expected. I was half hoping she'd beg to come back, if only so I could slam the door in her face. But nothing. Just silence. And then it hit me. She was probably with him. She didn't need me anymore, not even for closure. That's what lit the fire under me. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. The kind of angry that makes you want to rip something out of the ground and set it on fire. But I didn't throw anything. I didn't yell. I made a list. I started with her email. We shared a backup drive for tax files and work-related stuff. And because she never changed her password from the day I helped her set it up, I still had access. I logged in, clicked around, and found what I was looking for. Dozens of messages between her and him. Nothing too explicit, but enough to prove everything. They had been meeting up weekly, sometimes more. She talked to him about our marriage, called me distant, said I was emotionally closed off. She told him she felt alive when they were together, like he actually saw her. That was her favorite phrase. I copied every message, every calendar event, every thread, and saved them all. I uploaded the files into a new folder labeled for Jordan's wife, and I started searching. It took me 3 tries on social media to find her. She wasn't very active, but I recognized the last name and a couple of mutual connections from the clinic staff. Her profile said, "Married to Jordan T." and had a photo of them together at what looked like a beach wedding. I felt a surge of something ugly, but I stayed focused. I sent her a message from a burner account I made that morning. No introduction, just a polite, direct note. I believe your husband is having an affair with my wife. I have evidence. Would you like to see it? She replied within the hour. She said yes. I shared the folder. A few hours later, she wrote back, just one line. Thank you. Nothing else. I never heard from her again. I didn't need to. Next, I focused on the clinic. I knew their management ran tight. HR policies were strict, especially when it came to staff relationships. I printed out a packet of their emails, redacted my name, added a few screenshots that proved Julia had scheduled appointments that didn't exist, all on days she met up with him. I mailed it directly to the clinic director. No return address. Just a fat manila envelope that said confidential HR matter in black ink. I don't know what happened after that, but I know enough about corporate systems to guess it wasn't good. By the end of the week, I'd sold her car. It was under my name. She never transferred the title after I surprised her with it 3 years ago. She called once, probably the only time since she left. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that said, "Did you really sell my car? You've lost your mind." I saved it, then deleted it. The money from the sale wasn't much, but it was enough to make a point. I used it to hire a lawyer. I didn't want a messy court battle, but I wanted everything in writing. I wanted documentation of her leaving, of her infidelity, of her absence from the house. I didn't want her crawling back later with half-baked promises and legal threats. I wanted protection. People talk about revenge like it's childish, like it's something that only hurts you in the end, but I don't think those people have ever been cheated on by someone they build a life with. It's not about getting even. It's about regaining your sense of balance, of forcing the world to make sense again. I didn't scream at her in the street. I didn't throw her stuff on the lawn. I used the tools I had. I used her own words, her own lies, her own decisions. I made her choices cost her something. And the truth is, it didn't make me feel better, but it made me feel something close to sane. And that was enough. It was almost 2 weeks after she left when she showed up at the house again, unannounced, uninvited, and with that same mix of confidence and guilt on her face that I'd come to recognize too well. I heard the knock while I was in the middle of finishing a frozen dinner. I hadn't been cooking much lately, didn't feel like it. I opened the door halfway and didn't say a word, just stared at her. She looked different, somehow more tired, like the stress had finally caught up. She asked if she could come in. I waited a second, then stepped aside, but didn't say anything as she walked past me into the living room. She stood in the same spot she had during our last fight, and just looked around like she expected the furniture to accuse her. "I figured we should talk," she said, as if she hadn't shattered everything between us. I leaned against the counter and waited. She hesitated, then said, "I know things got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go this way." I asked her what exactly she thought this way meant. Did she mean the part where she disappeared into someone else's life, or the part where she lied until she ran out of energy? She ignored that and kept talking. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her, but she thought we should at least have an honest conversation about where we stood. I told her we stood in the wreckage of a marriage she chose to abandon. That seemed to sting, but she didn't push back. She sat down on the armrest of the couch and clasped her hands together. "I was confused," she said, "and I felt alone. For a long time, Eric. Not just recently." I told her being confused wasn't an excuse. Everyone gets confused. Adults talk. Adults say what they feel. Adults don't sneak around and leave hats in bedrooms that don't belong to the person they sleep next to every night. I watched her as she processed that. Her eyes didn't water. She didn't look away. She just looked tired. I thought Jordan understood me, she said finally. He listened. He made me feel like I mattered. I asked her if he still made her feel that way. She paused, then shook her head. No, he was a distraction. I see that now. I nodded, then asked her what she expected me to do with that information. Did she think it would make me feel better knowing she didn't even get what she wanted in the end? She opened her mouth to answer, but I kept going. I told her I had spent the last 2 weeks cleaning up the mess she left, not just in the house, but in my head. I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer. I told her I'd changed the locks, canceled the joint credit cards, and started the paperwork. Her shoulders dropped when I said that, but she didn't argue. I thought maybe we could work through this, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. I asked her why she didn't come to me when things got bad. I asked her why she let us get to the point where the only way she could feel noticed was to pretend I didn't exist. She didn't have an answer. She said she didn't know. She said she was scared. She said she didn't think I'd listen. I reminded her I'd asked her, again and again, to talk to me. I reminded her that she was the one who kept closing the door, not me. I don't want to fight anymore, she said. I told her this wasn't a fight. A fight is when two people argue because they both care. This was a verdict. I told her I was done. I told her I couldn't look at her without seeing everything she chose to throw away. She nodded slowly, like she had expected that but hoped she was wrong. I didn't come to beg, she said. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. For doing it. For being someone I didn't recognize. I believed her. That didn't change anything. I told her she needed to find a place to stay because I wasn't going to live in limbo while she figured out what kind of person she wanted to be next. I told her if she needed help with logistics, I'd be civil, but I wasn't going to pretend we were okay. She stood up and looked at me one last time, and for a second, she looked like the woman I married, just older, more worn down, and finally aware of what she'd lost. Okay, she said. I'll call you about the rest. I walked her to the door, opened it, and watched her walk away. The first week after she left for good, the house felt strange. It was quiet, but not in the peaceful way I thought I'd feel once she was gone. It was the kind of silence that makes you overly aware of every little sound. The fridge humming, the mail slot clicking, the neighbor's car starting in the morning. I didn't throw away her pictures, or burn her old clothes, or smash the wine glasses we used on anniversaries. I boxed up what was left, stored it in the garage, and told myself I'd deal with it when I was ready. Some of the things still had her scent, which irritated me more than it hurt. The dog didn't understand what was going on either. He kept looking for her around the house, sitting by the door in the evenings like she'd walk in any second. Eventually, he stopped waiting. I guess we both did. I didn't talk to a lot of people about what happened. I didn't want to deal with pity or with people trying to pick sides. I told my brother and one close friend, and that was it. The rest of the world could go on thinking we just drifted apart or that the stress of life got to us. The truth didn't need to be a community discussion. I didn't know anyone the full play-by-play. What mattered was that it was over. I wasn't proud of everything I did in response, but I didn't regret any of it either. I had been patient, I had been reasonable, and when the moment came, I stood up for myself in the only way that mattered, by choosing not to accept any more lies. I saw her once after the final conversation. It wasn't planned. I ran into her at the grocery store 2 weeks later. She was with a friend, maybe someone from her new apartment building. She saw me, gave a small wave, and I nodded back. That was it. No words. No smile. Just two people who used to be something standing 10 feet apart near the produce section. I watched her pick out avocados, and for some reason that made me feel something, but it wasn't sadness or anger. It was more like closure. She was living her life. I was living mine. And that was how it was supposed to be now. I signed the divorce papers 2 days after that. There was nothing complicated to divide. No kids, no business, no massive financial ties. It was all clean, which surprised me considering how dirty it felt emotionally. She didn't fight it. She signed without comments. No attempt to negotiate or plead. Maybe she was just as tired as I was. Maybe she knew that coming back would be worse than starting over somewhere else. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted it done. There were nights I still thought about it. Not just the affair, but the months leading up to it. I replayed the way she used to touch my arm when she passed by in the kitchen, how she laughed at jokes I don't even remember making, how she looked at me when I was fixing something around the house. I tried to figure out where that part of her went, whether it was still in there somewhere, or if it had just been temporary, something she put on like a coat when she wanted to play the role of a happy wife. I didn't come to a clear answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe people just change, and not always in ways we see coming. I didn't jump into dating. I wasn't looking to fill the space she left. I started going to the gym again, not to reinvent myself, just to feel like I had control over something. I got back in touch with a couple of old friends I hadn't seen in years. I said yes to things I usually turned down: drinks after work, hiking on weekends, a trivia night I would have rolled my eyes at 6 months ago. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me structure. It reminded me that there was a version of life that didn't involve always wondering if someone was lying to me. The weirdest part was learning to enjoy being alone again. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It started to feel like mine. I moved the furniture around, painted a wall, bought a new coffee table I actually liked. The couch didn't hold the same memories. The bedroom was no longer haunted. It was just a room where I slept. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And once it did, I felt like I could breathe again. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that love isn't just about how you feel when things are good. It's about what you do when things get hard. And when she got bored, when she got tired, when she wanted something different, she didn't talk. She didn't try. She looked for an exit. That tells me everything I need to know. So no, I don't wish her well. I don't wish her harm either. I just don't wish her anything. She's a chapter that ended, and I'm already writing the next one. That's how it ended. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without a final, dramatic moment. Just papers signed, boxes moved, names changed on bills. A clean break from a messy betrayal. I'm not who I was before this happened, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this version of me is stronger. Maybe this version knows how to see things for what they really are. And maybe that's enough.